Got the recording started. Gonna just throw it full screen and my video is loading. Okay, wait, there we go. So hello guys, welcome again to the third episode of the video game Anatomies podcast. And yeah, we're churning along nicely. The other two did really well, so I thought, we keep this going. It's a pretty good series. I think we're all learning some interesting stuff. Joined again here today by two guests this night. I will start with the familiar people. I've got my cousin here again, GetRektByMartie, returning for the third time. He is like a...
How are you guys?
He's almost a permanent member now. And for the first time ever, down below with the baby Grogu profile pic, that will be NeckRomancer.
Have it.
Yeah, he had a little bit of an inset on the second episode, but unfortunately couldn't make it. But he did have a part to say about God of War, but I got him now for the third episode here, so he can be here live and also give more of his kind of thoughts and feedback. So that is the shtick we're going with. And today, if you can't tell yet by the title, but today's episode is talking about dialogue. We need to talk the talk, because that determines how we walk the walk in most games. And we have seen this mechanic also in every genre of game you can possibly think of. It's been everywhere. It's been used a long time, and it's still being used everywhere. It's not like it's regressing or anything. And it's made games. It's really broken quite a lot of games, if that's kind of your stick. Mass Effect Andromeda. And it's defined genres. Its whole point is to move plot points forward. It carries motives and it conveys emotions. It does a lot of stuff when it comes to a video game, which you can tell it's a very delicate thing which you cannot really mess up, especially if you make it a focal point of your game. But yeah, it's also been around very, very long, as I mentioned. It's one of the oldest mechanics in games. At some points in games, it might even be on par with as long as the save has been around. So it's been with us for everything. But as I mentioned, it's a really fickle thing. It's something, in human nature, we do pick up very easy if dialogue feels natural, makes sense. If we are following the dialogue, if we're captivated or not captivated, because that also determines a lot. You need captivation in dialogue for a game to succeed on that focal point. But yeah, it's just one of the hardest things to portray. There's just a lot of facets when it comes to dialogue. So let's just jump into the beginning. We'll start there, obviously, and then work our way through how we got where we are now. So in the beginning, I'm guessing you guys probably have realized by now, similar to the save files of last time, there wasn't always a need for them. We can think of an obvious example here. Arcade games. No real need for dialogue in the beginning. There was nothing really to say in the game. There was nothing really like characters. There was no poor plot or anything in arcade games. You were just shooting spaceships or running away from ghosts in Pac-Man or doing whatever in an arcade game. There wasn't really much of a need for dialogue. So we had some of that, and yeah, it wasn't necessary at that point. But there were genres that started to appear where the need for a spoken or legible interaction between a player agent and the game or an NPC, it would make more sense, and it would also give you more of an idea or background on the game you're playing. So we saw this during the rise, especially of the prominent game genres of the 70s. Or the late 70s, to be specific, and the 80s. So the 70s we've mentioned have been dungeon crawlers, roguelike games, action-adventure games, but in the text format or stuff like that. And we, at the very least, needed a semblance of dialogue to just give some description to the player. What's it all about? What are we doing? Why are we here? What is, our motives? Why are we the protagonist? What's our quest? There's just simple things we needed to describe at this point. And obviously the first genre to really grab it by the horns would be the adventure genre, specifically the text adventure genre I mentioned. There were two very particular ones, very important ones. Colossal Cave Adventure in 1976 and Zork in 1977. Now, Zork has already been mentioned in this podcast series so far. Zork, I've also mentioned, is a hugely important game. But Colossal Cave Adventure is really also one of those ones that we need to understand how important this is. These two games are members of the World Video Game Hall of Fame. First of all, if you are into such a type of thing, there is a Hall of Fame for video games, and both of them are first-time inductees, so very important already. They show also exactly how different the dialogue can play out and how cleverly they use the technology at the time, because you have to remember now, this is 50 years ago at this point. We're talking 50 years ago of how they had to put in dialogue in a game and convey it to the player, especially when it came to making choices for the player or doing certain actions in response to dialogue, something like that. So let's just ask the two of you, because I'm now going to talk about the technology. When it comes to natural language processes, how familiar do you find yourself?
So I worked with it a little bit, but obviously not to the extent for game development. So working knowledge, not in this, but not in the. I never had to implement it to such a degree. So.
But concept-wise, you know more or less what a natural language process is. You know what it does.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, bot basically. Chatbot.
Yeah. A chatbot basically. A chatbot's a very, very nice recent example of how natural language processes have evolved and helped us. Marty, you have any experience before in coding with natural language processes, or not really?
Well, first, I don't really know what that refers to. If you can give me a brief explanation of natural processing.
Okay, so natural language processing is basically some sort of system or computer, and it's trying to, as it says in the name, process our natural language. We're giving it something, telling it something, and then it's trying to process and understand what we want, and then giving us an appropriate response. As NeckRomancer very cleverly mentioned here, chatbots like Siri and Alexa use natural language processor. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I understand. So, basically just these kind of response based on what you put in.
Yes, based on how they understand natural language and how we speak natural language. That's literally the idea behind it all. And it's obviously, as you can imagine, a kind of a difficult idea to try and explain to AI because, I can like, let's say, for example, I jumble up a sentence by accident. Like, it happens when you speak to someone, you can jumble up a sentence quite easily.
They'll still understand you.
So if I'm in a conversation with NeckRomancer, he'll easily pick up my jumble. He'll easily be able to scramble it around and say, oh, okay, I know what he means. I can just respond appropriately. Yeah. A little bit harder for AI, who kind of works on literal, like hard-coded, or not hard-coded, but very rigid rules. Like, it's not like a fluid rule that you can just follow, or a fuzzy, well, I guess you can have fuzzy logic, but
it has to be precise.
It has to be way more precise for AI, and that's the big thing.
So, yeah. Also, a problem is the event where, like, let's say you give a typed variable bigger variable size that it's used to, just cut off everything else and leave the other things away, or just like throw them away.
It's kind of like, that's the way we're going to get into. I'll try to describe it as best as I can, but it also depends from system to system and what the system is doing.
Yeah, in this case, I wouldn't really say I've ever worked with that, but yeah.
It's a weird thing to work in. Like, you won't see a lot of us work into it. Like, it's a very specific direction to go into, especially when it comes to coding.
I mean, there are tons of API and things you can use with chatbots and so on, that type of things.
No, it's true. It's true. Let's take it then into the context of 50 years ago, as I mentioned. As you can imagine, natural language processors not as advanced as they were today. So basically, they only had natural language processors at that time that they were using to get an input of a player. So you had to like type something on your keyboard and hope there were some instructions and some tutorials, but like you had to type something in on your keyboard and hope the system or the AI will understand what you're trying to do, like move left, move right, move up, go down, stuff like that. You had to type that, and then the AI would respond to that. And that's kind of how this played out, especially in Colossal Cave Adventure and Zork. So
I have one question.
Yeah.
If you something else about you had to give the thing instructions based on, let's say you want to go down, you had to say down. I can't think the level could be time orientated, because I mean that could take a very long time.
No, it's not real time. It's not real time. It was I think that was one of the sacrifices, obviously, they had to make for immersion, because there was no way a player could guess the correct response in real time. Like,
Yes.
it would break the experience more than it would make the experience. And that's kind of what we're going for. So
also more like the dialogue response back was like,
yeah,
if you said move up and it wasn't an acceptable response, it had like a stored message to say that if it was a door or something, then like that door is blocked or this passageway is blocked. So that's so unless the answer was the right answer, they just threw up random
errors.
basically
random
to
responses.
generate different messages to say basically wrong command.
Yeah.
But you as the player would know that means choose another direction or do something else.
It was kind of just they smartly tried to tell you what to say without like spelling it out on the screen
directly. Yeah.
So
if you said open door, and then say the door is locked. So if you have a key, then you say open door with key, or like unlock door. So that's like the kind of hints you'd say.
Yeah, very simple example. So these games use natural language processors, and they didn't only allow a player to give input of dialogue, but they also, as we said, had prepared responses based on the dialogue that they were expecting. Because obviously, the dialogue they would expect is limited. The amount of stuff you could say was limited, so it was pretty easy to have prepared responses. But the thing is, the appearance of it was very organic, because it looks like you're literally talking directly to the computer and creating your own adventure as such. You're exploring on your own, almost as if you're moving the character on a screen, but now you're just a text adventure. Very clever. And obviously, you're creating your own adventure because you're making the decisions, you're calling the shots. So we kind of just want to simplify how this game's the system pulled it off. As we mentioned, they programmed to find and pass simple one-word or two-word commands. So as we said, open door, go up, move right. Quite a few examples of that. Or even at times phrases, and if they contain the correct keywords or verbs in the input, there would be a correct or appropriate response. So Colossal Cave Adventure, as you can guess, that was you walking around in a colossal cave. We were based on kind of exploring a maze-like structure, and we used simple commands to kind of navigate or determine where we were going in this maze, how to engage enemies that we found in the maze, and other actions that would respond with an appropriate directional reaction to the input we had. So that's quite exciting. I think, you're going around a maze, figuring stuff out, in that direction there's let's say a troll. We don't want to fight the troll, so we're going to go right. But like you're getting all these programmed responses by the computer, and it's giving you a very organic experience that like you get to travel around this maze all you want. And that was the thing. Zork also did this. It took that even a little further, where you could alter the description kind of your surroundings and therefore get kind of more information. So for example, if you wanted a longer explanation, of what's going on, you had some verbose commands. And if you wanted a shorter explanation, you can keep it to the point. Maybe was not so interested in the story, so you kind of just get short responses to your dialogue. But more or less, you can decide how much information you're giving yourself, as well as how much you're investing into the world building, which is kind of one of the first times we've seen that, where there was a difference made between dialogue that's crucial to the story and dialogue surrounding lore. Very, very important point. It will circle back to that in the end, but it's very important to remember right now. There's dialogue, which is crucial to your story and crucial to your world, and then there's dialogue for lore. Not the same thing, usually. But so that's mostly how Colossal Cave and how Zork kind of implemented that. As you can see, very innovative, very revolutionary for a time. You can imagine it's very, very, very cool that they managed to pull that off in 1976, 1977. So I described here how we use natural language to progress the game, and we said it was the 1970s. You can imagine, obviously, like I mentioned, the limits, 1 word or 2 words, and it's not really practical to continue with that forward, because, there's only so much you can do in an adventure game if you have 1 word or 2 word commands that you can put in. Like, not really much else you can do with that. Like, you move around or engage enemies or maybe talk to someone. You don't want every single adventure game to follow that kind of recipe. You kind of want to keep it more diverse and stuff. So there was attempts of this to come out, but I will say before really we saw the other terms come through. The computer RPG games, the computer role-playing games, also had a crack a little bit at the natural language processors. We're talking about really old series here. I'm not even sure if anyone's familiar with it. It's the Ultima series and the Wizardry series. Very old games, like they're also in the 80s around there. Very long series games. I think Ultima, I think had about 9 or 10 games. Wizardry had like 11 games, so they had long game franchises, but all in the 80s. Very old computer RPG games. But yeah, as we said, they're still using the natural language processors, and it worked at the time, obviously still limited. We had some improvements to natural parsers or natural language processors in a game called Quest for Glory, because the developers Sierra Online Entertainment, they had one of these first prototypical skill checks in their game, which kind of made it interesting because you could only do certain actions if the skills that you were developing during the course of your gameplay had been to a certain level. So, for example, let's just say charisma, very easy one. Charisma is not level 5. You're not going to convince this guy to do what you're trying to tell him to do. If your charisma is above level 5, you're going to succeed. Easy skill check, but it was revolutionary at the time. One of the first times that's been done. That was like in 1980. When was Quest for Glory? I think 1983 or something. But yeah, it was one of the first prototypical skill checks, and it's also important to note it was able to do full sentences for natural language. Also a big step up, as you can imagine, because you can do a lot more with a full sentence than you can do with 2 words.
Yeah,
you can imagine.
That sounds increasingly like harder to code, and
you can imagine,
take the instructions. Yeah.
You can imagine just think about, you can have like records and records in your database, or dictionaries full of responses and like expected things the player is gonna say, and that you need to serialize, and you need to process, and you need to respond. It's a lot.
You're gonna have a lot of trial and error, but
no, you're gonna have a lot of trial and error, but like just the serializing and the processing of that input, as well as generating an appropriate output if you can.
Yeah,
it's starting to really take a toll on your memory and other things during your game. So performance-wise, we were seeing a lot of issues. But yeah, as we said, Sierra Online did something really nice with that. With the full sentences, they also implemented skill checks. It gives a little bit more of a spice to the stuff you can say, because obviously, if you did your homework, if you did your skills, you could pass the skill check. If not, you had to find another way to do it. There are a pretty cool and pretty weird company, Sierra Online Entertainment. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that game that company name at all. Pretty famous company in the olden days. If you guys want to take a crack at it, what games do you think they produced? Sierra Online
Entertainment. They make a bunch of like Quest games. I feel like whenever you hear the name, I think Quest.
So Quest for Glory was the one that I was speaking to now. Quest for Glory, that did have a bunch of sequels. I will say that.
Okay.
So that was in the 80s.
Were they bought up by somebody? I feel like
they were bought.
I heard
they were bought.
Then,
yes.
Other than that, I have no idea.
So they are currently working for Activision. Not the most relative games they're making at the moment. They're making King's Quest. I think you're thinking of King's Quest. That's them.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, that one.
They finished that one off just now, I think last year or something. They finished the last episodes of King Quest. But that's also been a very long ongoing series, and now it's been brought back when they were bought by Activision, and they've been doing, but not really big into them. Right, let's talk about the resume of Sierra Online Entertainment then. It's a very cool, but also very weird resume. Like, at the same time, they're like revolutionary rockstar legends. At the other time, they're like, oh, you pedophiles. What the hell are you doing? Because, honestly, listen to these names, right? I'm going to start on the good side. Half-Life. They helped make Half-Life. Team Fortress Classic. Counter-Strike. The 3D pinball game you play on Windows, and the solitaire game you play on Windows. Frogger. If you know what Frogger is, that's also a very big game. And the trilogy of Spyro. They helped make all of those. Ooh. All of those are under their belt. Now, let me tell you about the bad ones. And if you know any of these games, you'll know exactly what kind of things are going on there. But they were the Leisure Suit Larry series. I don't know if you guys know the Leisure Suit Larry series, but if you don't, thank your lucky stars. It's a bad series. They made an Austin Powers trivia game.
I mean, that doesn't sound so bad. I mean,
all right.
It depends on the game, I'm assuming.
They made... Okay, so this one, I think it was just a hit and a miss. They made the Mummy video game. I don't know really why the Mummy movie would need a video game, but okay.
Yeah.
Are you ready for the best one, though? I literally looked this up on Wikipedia. But I was very scared to click on the link, so I didn't see what it's about. It is a game they made in 1981, and it is titled Soft Porn Adventure.
That does not sound like it's true. That sounds like a meme.
Yeah.
You're kidding. That just sounds like a meme.
Google it.
I
Soft
don't
Porn
want to Google it.
Adventure.
I don't want to Google that, yeah.
Soft Porn
I'll take your
Adventure.
word for it. I'll take your word for it. I will take your word for it.
It's so, like, that's their resume, folks. You heard all the good and you heard all the bad. I don't know how you managed to do both, but they did. But obviously, a bit more good than bad. So, like, Quest for Glory in our context, they're very nice, very good, moved it forward. And obviously, we do still use skill checks to this day. Very important in RPGs, for example, because it kind of crafts more dialogue and it crafts more avenues for how, like, you approach every kind of interaction. Because it just kind of makes it a little bit more spice and, I guess, realistic. Like, you can't just go and repair something if you don't have a mechanical skill or a, science skill or something like that. It doesn't make sense
Or a
to be
medic
able to
skill
do
or
that.
something, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to be anything. So skill check made sense. There are some other cool things that they had in their games in terms of mechanics. Do you want to try and guess a mechanic? Think of like a pretty standard mechanic in a game. I would say it's a very standard mechanic, actually in all games, but this was the first time it's ever been done.
Shooting, jumping, I don't know.
That's a little bit primitive. I'd say it's a little bit more. It's more to do with the world. It's more to do with like world or environment.
Open world?
Interacting with objects?
Close with the world. It's the day-night cycle.
Oh.
First time ever. And the reason why this is important is it was also when they did day-night cycles, that's also the first time that you saw that the same place, let's say the same town or whatever, would be different at night than it would be at day. The merchants are not there on the street corners anymore. The NPCs you want to talk to are not there anymore because they go to bed. And the quests you do are day or night dependent, obviously, because you can't just do a stealth mission at day.
Though. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite cool that they managed to do that. And you see it in a bunch of games today. Just a quick example, Skyrim. You can't go to a merchant at night in Skyrim, I don't think.
Yeah.
Unless you mod it. Did you want to say something?
Sorry. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, like, some type, just a few you can, but not much.
No, it's probably so. I can't generalize. But yeah, Shankar?
I mean, who plays Skyrim unmodded? You said unmodded, like, yeah.
Vanilla Skyrim. Let's just say vanilla Skyrim. That'll be a bit more general. But yeah, they also, another thing they did, I did mention Quest for Glory was a long series. We're talking also about 6-7 games for Quest for Glory. They were one of the first games that introduced a character import system, meaning your character, with all their skills, with all their wealth, with all the character traits, could be imported from, let's say, Quest for Glory 1 to Quest for Glory 2.
What?
That sounds amazing.
When you said important, I was thinking about like Formula Far Explorer or whatever.
And I'm telling you, this is like 80s or 90s around here. This isn't like 2000 stuff where like it's easy to do a save. You like pick up a save and put it in a sequel. This is 1980s and 90s. This was big. This game did a lot for the computer RPG genre. But yeah, just overall well done, Sierra Online Entertainment. One of your better games out there compared to your rest, but thank you for this one. We appreciate it. But as I mentioned, we were still on natural language processors. We still needed something a bit more concrete because the thing is, we talked about this natural language processor. You're doing most of the guesswork. You're throwing in all those inputs on your computer and hoping one sticks to the wall and gives you more or less what you want. but it's not to say every time you're going to input something, you're going to get something out. And that's kind of could create frustration, irritation, and also, as we mentioned before, break immersion. We are reaching a point now where immersion was a lot more profound, let's say, than it was before. Immersion became quite an important deal of gaming at this point. So we wanted to think of something else. We still wanted to give that branching dialogue experience, but we wanted to give it more like we needed to hard code essentially the choices you could make so that it's easier for both us and the computer to process it. Hard coding a dialogue choice. And that, my friends, is where the dialogue tree made its grand appearance or grand, I'm here. So we're talking again about the Ultima series, the 10-game long series. In Ultima 7 in 1992, we had the first time ever a semi-dialogue tree. Now, I say semi-dialogue tree because it was still these one-word or two-word stuff you could pick, but it's for the first time you could click on it. You didn't need to guess what to type. You could click on it because it was physically on the screen as one of the options to what you could ask, for example, a merchant or an NPC. So that was big. That was big because it gives people a clear idea of what they're asking it and what information that they would receive information. So that made it a little bit more, as you can see, easier. It held immersion pretty well. And it is something that could easily have been obviously built upon because now you have laid the groundwork and now you can run away with that idea. And we did have another big game in 1992. This one is called Star Control 2. That is where the first proper dialogue tree was born. And, well, let me put it to you this way. Star Control 2 in 1992 is widely regarded by a lot of people to be one of the greatest video games of all time. And I know a lot of people go out and say, oh, this is the greatest video game of all time. Oh, this is the most greatest video game of all time. I cannot stress to you enough how important this game is because it decided to do a dialogue tree. Take away the dialogue tree. Pretend it never existed. How many RPGs survive?
I mean, take away the dialogue tree, a lot of RPGs would be better. That's a separate question. I understand what you're saying, though.
Okay, let's say the debatable, but let's take away, let's just say the games, if every game out there never gave you a choice to say anything, everything was linear, everything was just, oh, this guy says something, then I say something, oh, this, and then it's like the character just speaks. And they just have everything. You don't have a choice in anything. That is how important this game was. That is how significant this game was. It gave the first proper dialogue tree, proper NPC interaction, proper everything, just because of how well written and how well constructed its dialogue trees were. It's just so strong in how well it had this follow-up dialogue. Because you can imagine, branching dialogue is kind of tricky. You are following a path, a general logical path of a series of, like a conversation, and the conversation can only have some sort of, will reach a natural conclusion. But to get to that conclusion, obviously, you need to say a bunch of stuff to get to the conclusion. You can't just go boop, 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 and like it's logical to end with that conclusion. Like, let's say I talk to a guy, I aggravate him more, and then I greet him, and now everything's fine, even though I aggravated him many times. That doesn't really make sense now, does it? Because in terms of realism, you don't want to talk to someone who keeps aggravating you. So you're not going to. You shouldn't have that. And that's where Star Control really shone. It had that type of thing where things reached a natural conclusion. There was a logical conversation happening between you and the NPC, except it felt natural. And that's all what dialogue is about. It's that naturalness that is so difficult to capture that this game held in the palm of its hand. Now, I don't really want to discredit a lot of stuff. There were two games that we have glossed a little bit over with dialogue trees. And they weren't in the RPG. They were, again, in the action-adventure genre. So Indiana Jones and Last Crusade, 1989, had a dialogue tree. And The Secret of Monkey Island, in 1990 had a dialogue tree. Now, the reason I don't really mention these two all that much, first off, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is a movie. That is way too easy to make a dialogue tree out of, because the movie is your script. What can you possibly do different than the movie? But anyway, it had a dialogue tree,
It's
so
also
thumbs to you.
fun to this game. You really know what to do. It's like,
yeah, it's how it plays out. But I guess, yeah. And then Secret of Monkey Island was a point-and-click adventure, so everything was point and click anyway. I don't want to discredit it, but it was point and click anyway. So you had to click on stuff to do stuff anyway. So the whole game is based around that. It's not like the dialogue is very different than the whole game because everything's point and click. But it did have a dialogue tree. So props to you, Monkey Island. But Star Control takes the cake, just in how well it did that dialogue. Now, this was obviously a huge thing, as we mentioned, for RPGs. You can imagine, as I said, every RPG almost out there has a dialogue tree or some sort of branching dialogue or something. And it's all started here. And we're going to talk about a very big game. But let's just first circle back to you two. Dialogue trees, when we talk about specifically dialogue trees, first time you guys encounter dialogue trees, when?
Oh, I know what you're referring to, but in the sense, I don't like a game where you have to follow a specific storyline. In a sense, I don't want to be forced into the storyline, if that makes sense.
So you
by the dialogue.
So let's take, for example, Skyrim. Skyrim doesn't necessarily force you in. Well, it kind of does, but the thing is, Skyrim
I feel like there's I saw this one a video of some person playing where, do you want to attack this dragon? Basically, you say no, but then it attacks you anyway. Then it's kind of a pointless dialogue. That's what I'm trying. Like, if you're just gonna attack the dragon, just attack the dragon. Like, don't have a pointless dialogue where it's making you feel involved. When your decision is pointless. So, I feel like side quest dialogues I prefer. Like, do you want to take up this quest? That's like, it's a decision that you can take up, and sometimes there's a reward after that where it makes the game easier. Like, like an Easter egg kind of side quest where you don't have to do it, but it makes the game much more fun. Those I prefer because those dialogues make sense in the sense that even though it's plain old simple, do you want to do this? It's not really that much of a dialogue, but in the sense that your decision is a valid decision. Like, it's your decision. I feel like that's better than just a pointless dialogue where they try just for the sake of having a dialogue, they put a dialogue rather not have a dialogue. I think a few games could take notes for that, because I think a lot of games kind of feel, how do I put it? Kind of feel I don't know, like they feel like, oh, this is the thing that people want in games now. They all want to have choosy dialogue and they all want to have a say. This is like a thing like Dying Light 2. I like the game Dying Light 2, but I don't necessarily want to talk to everyone. And I don't necessarily want to decide what I want to say. I just want to go kill zombies. Why do I need to talk to people? Kind of weird. Yeah. That's why a lot of people are moving just to like online games, in the sense that we just want to kill. If you're going to play a shooting game, you just want to shoot people.
Yeah.
If you want a dialogue game, you go play like Assassin's Creed or something where it makes sense.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but majority of them.
We can talk about Assassin's Creed as well, because the Assassin's Creed one is also one for that like started only now to put choosing dialogue in that game, and I think probably you and my cousin will notice this. Like, circle it back a few Assassin's Creed, Black Flag, Assassin's Creed 3, 2, all of those never really had dialogue you can choose. But now you talk about the two latest ones, Odyssey, Valhalla. Both of those have dialogue choices in the people you come across, and it's interesting, but necessary.
And some of those choices has a permanent effect on your world.
No, that's true, and on the characters. And
yeah,
on the
if you see an effect where it wouldn't have been there regardless of your choice, then I feel like it's a good dialogue.
Yeah.
Whether it's better than what they implemented before. Like, I grew up with cutscenes, like God of War, Assassin's Creed. If I don't want to be involved, also skip is nice. You can skip the point of the dialogue.
No, I get what
Yeah.
you're saying. It's a fickle thing, as we mentioned.
I mean the dialogue. If they're asking for input, it must have an effect on the game, not just a point.
Not chit chat. Don't chit chat.
Yeah,
Like there are people who like chit chat. I don't like chit chat. I wanna get to the game. So yeah, but first time ever really I've seen dialogue. I didn't play enough of those RPG games and stuff in the beginning to notice dialogue. I'd say probably my first exposure was probably Skyrim. Just for the sake that Skyrim was the kind of first time I saw that change, because obviously you think of the Elder Scrolls series that started out as a CRPG, a computer RPG, which means they already had dialogue, and then it just carried over because by the time Skyrim was here, it was all on console. So that was obviously how I kind of first interacted with dialogue choices and all that. But before that, not really. I played shooters, action games, and other type of games that just had, as you mentioned, cutscenes, not dialogue.
Like Call of Duty, it had a nice storyline. It had a cutscene, with Ghost and all of that stuff. But it was nice.
No, it was nice.
You felt part of the story.
Nice, simple.
But you didn't. Yeah, and then you just shoot. It's like, which is basically all you want from Call of Duty. Just shoot and kill people. But you get the.
No, I get that.
I feel like it would have been a much shitty game. Well, it would have been a shitty game if they asked you for input in the dialogue, which had no.
Middle of the battlefield, you have to talk to your soldiers and you have to make like a dialogue choice while the bullets are flying over your head.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then you like tell someone, "I love you." We're having a moment here. Well, we're becoming prisoners of war, but we're having a moment here.
Imagine change from like a fight mode and sad and everything to happy just for a second and then back to it again.
No, it's funny because that's what dialogue sometimes does. That's what game does. But now, talking about the earliest involvements of this, talking about when it really took off, we said 1992 was the first time, and then it lit a fire over everyone. First of the big Western games, one developer was asked, "Can you put good dialogue in our game and bring it to a mainstream market?" That was Obsidian Games who got that assignment, and they said, "Hell yeah, I can. Hell yeah, I will." 1997, they made Fallout, the first one.
Ooh.
Fallout in 1997 was one of the first mainly Western media games that had a dialogue tree and a massive like kind of ripple it made, because to this day a lot of people just adore Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, especially the two isometric computer role-playing game turn-based games of Fallout, which, just listen to what I'm describing here, that is nothing like Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, and Fallout 4. Isometric, which means it's the top-down view and kind of looks like a puzzle put together. It's turn-based, which means like you get a turn to hit someone, then your enemy gets a turn to hit you, and then you get a turn to hit you. That's kind of like what, how do I put it, like kind of what Diablo and them did, and Final Fantasy. And it was also kind of computer RPG, so it didn't even reach the consoles yet, obviously, at that point, but still, it's just important to note this, like, this was a very, very different time for Fallout than what most people at now will used to. If you ask someone about Fallout now, they'll describe you Fallout 4, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 3, but they don't describe you how the first two games were. But these are the ones with a cult following. But yeah, your first game was Fallout 4, for example, I think. Wasn't it?
Mine.
Yeah, I think your first game was Fallout 4.
Yeah, on Vince's PlayStation.
Exactly, and like that, listen to what I described here. Fallout 4 is a lot different to what I just described. First person,
yeah, I mean,
action, survival.
Just when I started Las Vegas last year, it was so much different and everything.
And it's still also different. So yeah, but these games had a lot of things going for it. It had portraits of characters with like the animated expressions, like when you talk to them, that was big. It had dialogue that was spoken that you could say, and they would have live reactions in these character portraits, skill checks from like that it carried over from the other games that I said, and it limits what you could say based on obviously what skills you had. Even some of your skills would limit what your literal dialogue was. Like, let's say a low intelligence, if you were to, example, try to do low intelligence runs in Fallout, you would literally just speak gibberish because you would be such a low intelligence that your character couldn't do basic speech. You can imagine how many times you antagonized the people you were talking to because all you could say was blah 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 duh. I'm not joking.
Yeah.
This was a voice line in the dialogue tree that you could pick because of your low intelligence. Blah 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 duh.
I see.
For everyone.
One thing I still find most games don't get right is actually the time. How can I say the time reserved for each person has been made in terms of dialogue. So I know some games have the time-oriented dialogue. We have to. Yeah, we have a certain time to answer a question, but I mean, in most games, you can literally just want to sit there whole day and not answer. Yeah,
it's so weird.
It's kind of broken.
It's just something that happens. But it was obviously we didn't have real time yet. We're gonna get to real time later on in the podcast. But yeah, as I mentioned, this game was mostly just all of that. But you can imagine how much this took the world by storm. And yeah, it just threw all of those magical ingredients into a big stirring pot. It got a lot of accolades, a lot of acclaim. This game had a lot going for it, and by many, in all accounts, this is being described as one of the first modern RPGs. What a modern RPG embodies. The skill checks, the dialogue, the dialogue tree, we'll debate that one later, but the dialogue, the way RPGs should kind of be constructed. This one was the first one they described as the modern one, moving away from the more kind of traditional one that the 80s and early 90s ones were. But yeah, let's also just think about that for a second. I think I lost my place. Never mind, I got my place in my script. But yeah, so I want to just also track back to this point because a big thing that I did lost a little over in the followed one, voice acting was very prominent in this game. It had a lot of famous voices on it. It had a lot of good voice acting that you could put there. Now I want to ask you guys, voice acting wise, if we spoke about dialogue now, and you can imagine how dialogue was described in games, but voice acting is a different beast. That's when you hear an actual character with an actual voice speak, and they carry some sort of personality based on their voice acting and all that, and how the tone and everything is. Now, when do you think, in relation to dialogue, I remember that the first dialogue we saw was in 1976 and 1977, really? Around there? When do you think the first voice acting was, in correlation?
Probably late 90s.
Late 90s? You want to?
Honestly, I have no idea.
1983. 1983. So it is a little bit earlier. It was a Disney game called Dragon's Lair. Now, a little bit of trivia here, because as you probably would logically make sense now, we didn't pay celebrities or very high, really good voice actors at that point yet, because voice acting wasn't a thing. So why pay a celebrity or a good voice actor to do a voice? We could just ask one of our game devs, which means you probably got very bizarre and kind of off-key type of things, like, oh no, the prince is here. You kind of got voice acting like that, because obviously they don't do voice acting work. So literally they would hire these guys in their free time to record voice lines for the game. And coincidentally, that's the first voice acting we had in the 1980s. But yeah, we also had now our look back now into these CRPGs. You can obviously now see the big names I've mentioned and what they did for us: Quest for Glory, Star Control 2, Fallout, the 2 original, Fallout 1 and Fallout 2. That's a lot of influence that the CRPGs brought to the table. But before we move to the modern RPGs, have you guys ever played any CRPGs or have any fond memories of them? Do you play CRPGs still? Or
I wouldn't say no.
It's old, no. So it's I would say it's a little hard to find most of them, but there's some. Any ones for you, NeckRomancer?
No. I'm just trying to think. Have I? Even by mistake? I don't think so.
You don't know? So there's a few big names. I'm going to mention mine. Maybe you've played it. I've played Diablo 2. That's the RPG.
Oh.
That was my first and only one so far.
Well, I didn't play Diablo.
I played Diablo. So that was a CRPG at the time.
I would have purchased it on Xbox 360, but I didn't.
Yeah, the Diablo 3 was the first one I went to consoles, but Diablo 2 was still a CRPG. So that was the only one I have played Diablo 3, but a demo, but I've played Diablo 2 on a computer, on its traditional software and all of that. But that's pretty much the only one I've played. Like nothing else. I know of the others, and I know like how big some of those games are, but I just haven't really played them. So
Yeah, no, I don't think I've played that many.
It's a fickle
If I
genre.
have, was by mistake.
Yeah, no, it's a genre that you have to have a taste for, or obviously you're a bit of a more old school gamer. If you were a bit of an more old school gamer, it would have been way more of a library. Like, let's say we're talking 90s and 80s years, where literally the bulk of them are. So it is a little bit of a more old school vibe to it and stuff like that. But yeah, moving on with the times, moving towards the more modern RPGs, they were kind of the trendsetters now when it comes to dialogue, because we mentioned now Fallout and Star Control 2, they were like being looked at as, oh no, they're gonna do the new big things with dialogue, because like RPGs, they were role playing and everything. Obviously, we're playing a role. There should be some dialogue. There should be some stuff we can do. There should be some like innovative stuff we can think of. And there was some innovative stuff we can think of. Little tweaks, little tinkering there, and just all out new stuff. So, for example, games that needed a little bit of a revision when it came to dialogue systems. Think of Baldur's Gate or Dragon Age. Those are two games with party systems. For example, Fallout also had this after a while. I think Fallout New Vegas and 4 obviously had this. So like think of party systems or companions that you can like have tag along with your little adventures. They come along with little adventures. They're there for you, and they kind of have to react in real time towards what you're saying in a dialogue. So say for example you have a companion that doesn't like stealing or doesn't like you intimidating people. If you're going to go continuously and intimidate merchants to give you lower prices, or intimidate NPCs to tell them you saw nothing, you would imagine obviously your companion would start disagreeing with you or start having some sort of turn in your relationship. You can't just expect them to be like, oh no, I'll accept anything the protagonist does. Oh no, they've got plot armor, I will listen to them. It's not realistic. It makes sense to have these kind of moral, natural conflicts of interest, especially when it comes to such things in your type of party system or companionship, where maybe your views don't agree with the person you're traveling with, and they should have a natural kind of reaction or stand against this, like to say, oh no, I don't think this is right, why'd you do this, I don't like this, like, and they make it known. That makes a little bit more sense than just having them be robotic almost towards it. So
yeah, it's pointless.
Yeah. Also a major component that also made its way to RPGs, especially prominent now as we moved forward to more modern RPGs, dialogue barking. Dialogue barking is actually something you guys probably know very well. It's just got a very weird name. But think of it like a dog barking or dialogue barking. It's conversations that NPCs have with each other, or that they just, say, like a bark. They just say it. You don't have to do anything. You just walk past them and they'll say it.
Wait. Oh, okay.
There's a very, very like famous one here, and it's used in a lot of stuff. But yeah, it's either to infuse more story or more world building, or maybe it's just to annoy you. Who knows? There's dialogue barking in almost every game. I'm gonna name a famous one. I used to be an adventure like you, and then I took an arrow in the knee. That's a dialogue bark. You walk past a Whiterun guard and they'll just say it. Or they say, what's wrong? Someone stole your sweet roll. Or,
oh yeah.
Yeah, you better put that staff or claws away because you have your staff or claws out.
It might upset a guard or,
Yeah.
Yes.
That's dialogue barking. It's just an NPC saying something out of the blue, or just having a conversation with another NPC.
Making a statement.
But obviously, as I mentioned now, how many times do you hear that exact sentence about I used to be an adventurer like you, and then I took an arrow in the knee? How many times do you hear it every time you play Skyrim?
Probably
a lot. Which means if you do not have variety in dialogue barking, and you hear a phrase like that every single time you enter a town, or every single time you pass an NPC like that, you're going to be annoyed. Slightly. Because you're thinking, say something else, please. I can't keep hearing the same thing over and over. So, that's just a fickle thing as well. Dialogue barking was a really interesting addition. It helps with world building. It can help with immersion and other stuff, but you can annoy the player and break immersion at the same time because you're not variety enough. One game that does do this cleverly, I will note, Deathloop was a game that came out very recently. Deathloop is all about people, one guy waking up on the same day every day. It's the same day repeats every day, and he has to figure out how to break the loop. Which means the game is clever enough that exactly because you have 4 phases of the day. You have morning, noon, afternoon, evening. And you have 4 areas you can explore at all 4 times. If you go to a certain area at a certain time of the day, the dialogue every time will be the exact same because the day is repeating.
Same character, same dialogue. That makes sense. I get it.
Same dialogue, but it has a point to it because the day is repeating and you want to break the loop. But it makes sense why they would say the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Because to them, it's just day 1, but to you, it's day 1000. But it was a very smart thing, and I was thinking about it the whole time, like, I know why he's saying it the whole time. Because it's the same day.
Yeah.
And it was fun.
It wasn't annoying, yeah. It was part of the game, it made sense.
It's a little clever. And for once, yes, it's part of the game and it makes sense. It's a little bit clever to do it like that, but yeah. Another real interesting few additions, there was a little bit of a more, let's just say a lot of people are divided on this one. I don't like this addition. I'm going to be honest with you. I see the merit behind it. I don't like it in role-playing games though. We're talking about the dialogue wheel, which was a kind of replacement for the dialogue tree. So the dialogue wheel, we see this actually a lot in BioWare games. Mass Effect does this. I didn't play Mass Effect enough really to pick up on how much, but I've played Dragon Age and I did not like it in Dragon Age. But the dialogue wheel behind it is it's still a branching conversation, similar to what dialogue trees have, but it's a very much more streamlined or general thing that you're going to say. Now, if I'm saying that, for example, let's say a character's talking to you, they are not happy, they're like, oh, my clan is, been attacked by you people, what are you going to do? And then literally the game tells you, this is all the game tells you. Diplomatic, neutral, aggressive. You have no idea what your character's going to say, but you have to pick diplomatic, aggressive, neutral. That's all you know. The tone of what you're saying is going to be that, but you have no idea what your character's going to say. So let's say you pick diplomatic and you say like the worst voice line you've ever heard, and it's so like it makes you cringe because like, oh no, my character's not like that, but I chose it because it sounds diplomatic. But I didn't know that he was going to say that. Another popular thing, if it's not that, it paraphrases what you're going to say. I also don't like that. Don't paraphrase what I'm going to say, because it would say like, where you from? And it's like, did you come from that side? I'm like, that's not what you said you were going to say. Stop saying that. Like, that sounds worse that way. So that's the dialogue wheel. Obviously, you can see the appeal behind it. People they felt like a dialogue tree obviously tells you exactly what you're going to say in a text box, and some people don't read too much into that, and they're bored, and they don't want to do dialogue the whole time. So they'll pick the quick options. So the dialogue wheel is maybe a bit better for those people who just want to pick a diplomatic, aggressive, neutral option, something that sums up their feelings or sums up the kind of response they want to give, but without having them read the entire dialogue. Obviously, the drawback of this is you have no idea what you're going to say. So that's the only thing you have to sacrifice if you're going to play with a dialogue wheel. You're going to get a tone of what you're going to say, but you have no idea what the words are going to be. It just comes out of your mouth, which is why I don't like it. I kind of want to know what I want to say when I'm playing role-playing games. That's just how I play. So that is.
I gotta get annoyed if I play the game and I saw that.
I don't know. It feels like you're telling me the dialogue's not important. If you're not willing to tell me, like, this is exactly what you're gonna say, it makes me feel like whatever I'm saying has no relevance. Because obviously I don't know what I'm gonna say. Like in a linear game, sure, makes sense. It's a linear game. I don't have to have a choice. This is how the story plays out. And this is the
I'd rather have a cutscene. Now you understand what I mean.
I'd rather have a cutscene.
Yeah.
But don't go in there and tell me I'm gonna make a diplomatic option, but you won't bother telling me the dialogue, because then it tells me what I'm saying has no relevance. It's just the fact that I was trying to be diplomatic, which they're gonna take away.
Yeah.
Okay then. So we did see this in a Fallout game, by the way. Fallout 4 does this. I don't know if you remember the dialogue, Marty. The dialogue for Fallout 4, I remember specifically, there was, I think, square used to be the aggressive option. Triangle almost always says sarcastic. That's all it says is a line, sarcastic. So you know you're going to say something snarky or sarcastic, but you have no idea what you're going to say. Now, listen to what I said like a few minutes or so ago about the Fallout 1 or 2 games that were praised for its dialogue, for its comprehensive thing. We talked about, well, I didn't talk about it, but New Vegas, Fallout New Vegas was a game that's absolutely got a cult following for dialogue and how important it was to the game and how well it was written. Can you imagine what these people did when they figured out the next game is literally saying aggressive, sarcastic, neutral? And that's the options you have in a almost the whole series was based on dialogue and like what you say, and now you're just making like you're just dumbing it down kind of and focusing more on the action. It's kind of it's kind of bizarre how that really played out, but yeah, some games do it and some games don't. So, as I said now, and as we can see, the RPGs was kind of still fiddling around with this whole thing. They wanted to try new stuff. Like, it makes sense to try and add new stuff because the dialogue shouldn't, like, the dialogue systems we're used to shouldn't go stale or kind of be outdated. We want to keep it fresh. We want to give it new ideas and stuff like that. Obviously, one thing that did help, technological innovations were helping a lot with this. I think one of the biggest technological innovations we could say thanks to, and it's stretching further than RPGs here. One of the biggest technological innovations we can say a lot of thanks to because it helps so much is motion capture. Thank goodness motion capture came into in gaming, because the thing is, motion capture captures faces and emotions so well compared to other games. Like, yes, you can say the most beautiful thing in a game, but you're looking at this lifeless face that just says, I love you. I've always loved you. And you mean everything to me. But there's no emotion there. No matter how nice your words are, I'm not getting any emotion from this face. And I'm not like dunking on people. There were emotion and they tried like to animate and stuff, but it was just so hard. And I think motion capture really, really did something big with that. LA Noire, the Rockstar game, did a big thing. LA Noire is a detective game where you are trying to solve a murder, and one of the biggest things you need to pick up on is what people say, but the expressions they give. Are they expressions of someone who looks like they're lying or not? And that's obviously something in real life a lot of us feel we can pick up on. Body language, how the eyes are looking. You know, is the mouth quivering? Is it doing something weird? Is there something like weird going on with the expression of the face when you're trying to tell someone something like, I didn't steal that. Listen to the tone of my voice. I didn't steal that. What do you mean? It's the tone of the voice. It's the expression in my eyes, the way I'm shifting around like this. That does that. It's the body language I'm showing. If I'm like being aggressive, am I being defensive? It's stuff like that that motion capture undoubtedly really, really captured really well. And it as I mentioned, contributed a lot of games. LA Noire, Last of Us in 2013 did a lot of mocap. We saw it in games like Detroit Become Human, Heavy Rain. They also did mocap, and it looks really good. Marty's played Detroit Become Human. You know how good the expressions and the emotion and stuff is in that game, just because of how you can see everything in this face. Like the face tells the whole story.
Yeah, I mean, and things like stress levels and so on that influences your decisions and so on.
And that was also a very nice thing. I was gonna circle back to that. Detroit Become Human and Heavy Rain are two very interesting games because they have real-time dialogue. And as we mentioned earlier, it's kind of weird that you can have dialogue choices that you can literally leave for an entire day and then only make a choice. This is real-time dialogue in a real-time environment, and if you're not quick on your responses, you're not gonna get the outcome of this happen. But that's realistic. No one could wait for you to say something. They've got their own agendas. They've got their own things they want to do. They can't just wait on your responses the whole time. It's an interesting concept as well. Also, Detroit Become Human, you were like a cop and something, and you were interrogating people, and you had to pick up on their levels of stress while you were interrogating them. You had to pick up on like if they were being too aggressive towards you, if they're gonna attack you or something, and you had to like diffuse the situation. So it had a lot of interesting things with that motion capture and real-time environment. That's
Didn't God of War
motion capture.
what Ragnarok implement that?
So the new God of War and Ragnarok on both have motion capture, and you can tell. You can really tell if you look at Kratos' face, especially. There's a lot more emotion in that face, even for someone like Kratos, a monotone character. There's still a lot of emotion in that face, way more than the old games.
But in that game, you could actually feel that emotion, even though it was monotone. It was like the tone was sad.
The tone was sad. You can hear the tone of his voice when he speaks to Atreus. If he's angry or happy or sad or whatever, he speaks to Atreus with a tone and with like.
But if you just look at that game, the dialogue there, it made sense. It wasn't pointless. There was a story to be told, and it never asked for your input. You were there watching the story, not controlling the story, which I feel was a better use of that tool, which is dialogue. No pointless. I'm sure, but you understand what I mean. Like, they used it in the sense to tell a story, not for you to be part of the story. In the sense, I feel like it's better to look like you had fun in the game by killing, killing stuff, and playing the game. But like the dialogue more contributed to you, engaged in the damn game. Not just it never annoyed you. You know what I'm saying?
No,
that's the main thing.
And it had such a logical kind of steps to its story, like how it starts with just Kratos trying to learn Atreus something, and then at the end it shows how Atreus is growing and like he's able to learn more and he's able to have more honest, open conversations with his father, who at the time was a very kind of shelled off person. A very
even like how you said what dialogue barking or something, but like instead it's background noise, but like we're learning a lot. It's nice to hear filling the silence. Is they fill it with dialogue, but like
and they build the world. And
it build the world, exactly.
Interesting things.
And I feel like that's proper use of all the tools that you just mentioned, like the motion,
capture,
camera thingy, and then the dialogue, and then but more like that's how I feel it should have been used. If you're not gonna, if there's no point to it, like I'm stressing this point, they never use it. If there was no point for us to, if there was no point to it, I feel like never use it, and that's what they did. They just made a really good game.
Yeah,
and I feel like that's what people should just do.
I think that's huge thumbs for them. So now we're looking back at some of these concepts now that I've mentioned: motion capture, the modernization kind of dialogue, the way party in-game systems are used in those games, the real time, the more organic responses of dialogue, the dialogue wheel controversy, all of those. Let's get some thoughts also from both of you. Tell me either about the do's or the don'ts of dialogue. What do we want from dialogue and what do we not want from dialogue? I've heard now a few things, obviously, about like have a point to your dialogue, for example. Good one. Now let's think about more technical stuff. What do you want dialogue to do and not do? Technically, in the technical sense.
Okay,
well, I would say the side of what dialogue should do is adapt to your choices and then make choices based off what you chose, and also change the environment and stuff based on that. And what it shouldn't do is to use repetitive things. Like let's say you once use this dialogue and then in a later game you get the same dialogue again and so on.
Or the same response, kind of.
Yes, and literally do not change. Does not change.
Yeah, they can have like you can kind of be it can have a stale taste in your mouth if, for example, you do a bunch of actions but you still elicit the same response in dialogue.
Yes.
Someone like, let's say the difference between stealing something, just a simple one, stealing something and murdering someone, but does you get the same dialogue? You monster! I'll never speak to you.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's kind of cheap.
I don't want people to like technically like just use dialogue, even like some form of dialogue, if dialogue box or dialogue, even a dialogue tree, but to try and make us believe that it's not a linear game. If it's going to be a linear game, and like regardless of your choice, the outcome is already predefined. There's no point in doing it.
No, that's true.
I feel like that's a waste of dialogue and our time. Imagine if you didn't like the outcome of the first choice. You chose, so you chose kill this person, and then for some reason like, oh, I don't want to kill this person. Then you like restart, the level or something where you don't kill this person, but anyway he attacks you, then you have to kill him anyway. I feel like that's a waste of time. The whole point, if I'm given a choice, I'm assuming that my choice has an effect on the game. So a dialogue tree must have actually have like it must actually open another avenue in the game. Not just if that makes sense. It's like, leave the country, yes, I will leave the country, then you leave the country. That yes must mean something. Not just like, oh no, you can't leave the country. If that makes sense. I don't want to be offered something that has no effect. And that's, I think, the main thing.
I think for me, on my side, the do's, I guess the do's and the don'ts. So do's, I'd like when little things are picked up on. And it's like, not like a lot of people can notice something about you. Not like, I'm not saying everyone knows everyone, but let's put it in perspective. Like I did joke a lot now about Skyrim's dialogue barking. Okay, I did joke a lot about it, but I will give them, for example, props for something like, let's say, for example, you were to wear elven armor. The Whiterun guard will immediately, in his dialogue bark, pick up that you're wearing elven armor and compliment. He says, "Ooh, that's a very good, like elven breastplate or whatever. Fine craftsmanship, because the elven are that good." That's a good thing too. Just a little like sprinkling there of a world building thing. That the fact that the Whiterun guard would know about elven craftsmanship. Very simple, very easy to put into a game. And there's little things like that where they pick up on stuff like that. Maybe, for example, say you're doing a stealth mission. If you're dressed for a stealth mission in a clown outfit, there is no way someone should take you seriously. For example, let's say you're doing a stealth mission with someone and you show up in a clown outfit that you got from like Microtransaction City. There's no way that your partner should say, "Yeah, let's go on the stealth mission." He should say, "No, go back, change." You can't freaking go like that. They're gonna spot you. But it should be that like immediate pickup of stuff, and like where dialogue tries to tell you about like logical things in a story. I think the other thing, the don'ts in dialogue, I'm gonna be a little bit debatable about this one. Don't make you able to talk out of everything. The reason I'm saying this is, if there's a confrontational situation, and there's a character for confrontation in every situation, not every character should be able to be talked out of confrontation or a fight or something. It doesn't make sense for some characters. If you're telling me there's a mass murderer out there, and I'm taking, like, I have been taking down this whole organization, and like I've been from the inside out, I've been tearing everything down, and now there's a final confrontation. He's here like, "Yeah, I've been waiting for you." Don't give me an option to talk him out of it. He's a mass murderer. He knows what he's doing. He's part of an evil organization. He's not going to want to talk. He's going to want to kill you. There's no need for dialogue there. Put a cutscene, put a fight, done. Don't make a dialogue there. Like, it doesn't need a dialogue. Honestly, we had that was the weirdest one in Dying Light. Dying Light had a very kind of, there wasn't in the first Dying Light, a lot of its characterization was black and white. This is evil, this is good. There was some grays, but a lot of it was very, because it went for a simple narrative. It said, this is black, this is white, and like that's the narrative and the characterization. And you could still have a dialogue with the boss at the end. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to talk to this guy. He's not going to change. And he didn't change. Like, luckily, they didn't actually make it manageable to talk him out of stuff. But, like, you could still have a conversation with it. I was like, oh. But anyway, that's more or less, I think, what our do's and don'ts sum up. I'm going to read a little bit of an interesting thing as well from a game developer, a little report I picked up from a game developer that they just sprinkled a little bit of notes here, a little bit of a helpful guide that they said what they regard as key points. Remember what I said about the lore, where the dialogue crucial to a story and a dialogue to lore are two separate things. They are arguing lore is optional. Do not exhaust your dialogue of explaining what is going on in the lore. Rather, treat it as a collectible that if a player has enough interest, they will actively go out and find lore. Some games have picked up on this message. Take, for example, God of War, as we mentioned. If you were to go on a boat ride with your son and with Mimir, sometimes Kratos would tell stories about the Greek mythology.
Yeah.
But you had to go on a boat ride to trigger it. Yeah, you had to go on a boat ride to trigger it. He doesn't just randomly say it, or you don't have to have a random dialogue like halfway through your story for it. It was, if you did this activity, there would be a conversation. That would be that. Same goes for Last of Us, actually. Last of Us had an interesting thing where it had optional conversations. So, like, the side character Ellie would, like, let's say you were walking around as Joel. Side character Ellie, obviously being born in the apocalypse, some things are new to her. She would, like, one of the ones I remember is there was this very overgrown, broken down ice cream van. And literally she would say, what the hell is that? Why has it got, like, ice cream imagery on it? What is that? And then you could have an option to try and explain to her what ice cream vans were in the olden days, or you could just ignore it. If you ignored it, the story goes on. If you chose to explain it, there was a little bit of lore, because you can tell, oh, Ellie doesn't know what ice cream vans are, of course, because ice cream vans don't exist anymore, and she wasn't born when they were around. Easy. Simple. Just make it optional. Like, you don't have to exhaust the player, because not a lot of people, or let's say, not everyone has an interest in lore. They kind of just want a general story with some minimal dialogue. That's that. They're just there for an experience. They don't want to have the whole lore. Because, I mean, a lot of games out there have exhausting lore, as you can imagine. Exhausting lore. And it's like that sometimes. Dialogue should never be overdone. As we said now, keep it brief and concise. That's a very easy one. Keep it brief and concise. You can put stuff into cutscenes. It's okay to have a cutscene in an RPG. It's really okay. Not everything has to have a dialogue. Dialogue should either have a motive or give the player information. So either you're progressing the story or you're telling me where to go. One of those two. Your dialogue has to do one of those two. As we mentioned before, dialogue has to have a point. And yeah, that is pretty much kind of a summation of it all. I think a lot of games need to calm down with dialogue. We need to come to a point where we say, right, this is necessary, this is not. You need to start. They need to be more smart with it. They need to be smarter with their choices of dialogue. I think a lot of games are suffering from that. I will say I'm a sucker for this, and I'm a little bit biased because it is my favorite game. Exposition dumps in dialogue usually are a no-no. As you can imagine, that's in movies as well and other media. It's not really a good idea to do exposition dumps just out of nowhere in a random thing. I will say the one game that actually did it well was Death Stranding. I don't know why, but they managed to do an exposition dump so expertly. You'd literally, I'm not joking, Marty also played the game. You would sit there and it's a 15 to 20, okay, it is cutscenes at least, it's not really dialogue, but it was a 15 to 20 minute cutscene. I'm not joking, a 15 to 20 minute cutscene, which is essentially an exposition dump, but it's done so well and it has a point towards the story that I didn't mind it. It was so weird, but it was good to see a game that could take essentially what is an exposition dump, because it had a massive story to tell and it had a lot of stuff to dump on your head, but it did it so well, and I was invested. And I didn't need dialogue. All it took was a cutscene. Easy. So honestly, people should
Yeah.
like really. I think people should really be kind of smarter with their dialogue. Be smarter with how you want to convey your message in a game. Does it have to be dialogue? Can it be a cutscene? Do you have to even say anything at all? That brings me also to a big point that I want to say, because I'm actually kind of done here. But I want to bring one more final point home, and I want to have an honest opinion here. Does a dialogue, now I'm also talking no cutscenes here, by the way, so don't think I'm like saying cutscenes are part of the game still. Does an RPG need dialogue or cutscenes to be considered an RPG? Does it need it?
Well, then how do you know what role you're playing in terms of in terms of how do you know what storyline it is? How do you like be part of the world kind of thing?
That's one way
It's
to look at it.
I mean,
That is an opinion.
I don't
So
know.
like, I mean, if you can see in that way, you are playing a role. It makes sense to be able to speak during that role. It makes sense to be able to like convey a role. If I want to be a aggressive guy, or if I want to be a diplomat, I should be able to act like an aggressive guy or a diplomat. Fair assumption. Marty, did you have anything like that? Do you feel?
I mean, there would be a lot of visual clues with it, but I mean, the whole basic idea would come from all the text and actual audio that or I mean dialogue that tells you where you are, what you're doing, and kind of like a monologue too.
I will give you one very famous RPG that has no dialogue and it has minimal cutscenes. I won't really count it as cutscenes because it doesn't really count. What do you think?
Well,
There's a very famous RPG out there with no dialogue and no cutscenes.
Okay, wait.
You
mean dialogue in terms of no
you
dialogue
don't do
at all,
any speaking.
or
No,
just
you don't do any speaking in it.
There's a lot of actual. There's like you can communicate with people without actual hearing of it.
Well, like,
If
I mean, you're not saying anything in the game whatsoever. Your character doesn't speak in this game.
Oh, I mean, in Skyrim you don't speak.
No, but you have dialogue because you're choosing dialogue.
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't count.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
There's a very famous game out there. You wanna try a guess? Very famous. It has a whole series. One of its newest stuff came out recently. One of the newest stuff that a lot of people at our work went on leave for came out recently.
Dark Souls.
Dark Souls has no dialogue, no cutscenes.
Yeah, I haven't played
and it's a very
Dark
strong
Souls
RPG.
before.
It has nothing because it does everything visually and with world building. It is one of the smartest RPGs out there.
Because that's just a good game, though. You know, that's a different kind of.
And it's someone who figured out I can do all my storytelling through the world, through visual cues, as Marty mentioned, through.
I mean, the greatest dialogue they have there, though, I mean, is "You died." That's all you need.
Yeah, and everyone's like, "Whoa, Kevin, yeah, I died. Whoa."
Yeah.
No, it's honestly that. It's just an interesting thing. It's like a phenomena to see it in the modern age. It's an RPG. No one will deny that it's not an RPG, but it doesn't have dialogue and it doesn't have cutscenes.
Yeah.
So, can it be done? Can it be done for other games?
I mean,
well,
I guess it can. I mean, they did it. They did it a bunch of times. There's a bunch of games in this series.
Should other games do it, though? You know, each game. I mean, if a new game comes out, then yes. But like, just as we, you know, when you have a franchise that tries to change, like, too much, I feel like then just make it. Just that company should just make another game. Don't try and ruin that franchise.
No.
That's what I'm. That's my view of it.
That's what I'm thinking as well. I think a lot of games should just tread carefully about like keep to what your franchise makes. I will add as a footnote, Japanese RPGs I did remember I said in when I was talking about Fallout, one of the first Western games to bring like dialogue trees and stuff like that. Japanese RPGs often functioned without any dialogue at all. Like, I'm not even talking dialogue trees, like dialogue where NPCs were talking to you. When I say 1976 was the first time we saw dialogue in a game, full stop, when do you think the first JRPG, taking into consideration there were JRPGs before this one, when was the first one with dialogue came out? If the first dialogue we saw was in 1976, when was the first JRPG with dialogue out?
I'd say mid-80s.
No idea.
1988 in Final Fantasy.
Ooh.
12 years
Oh.
after dialogue appeared for the first time,
First
was the
Final
first time
Fantasy.
JRPG would come out. So, just to give you an idea, the Eastern media just didn't see dialogue as important in their RPGs. They were like, nah, we just do world building. We'll just do characters. And we're fine with that.
I mean, that is better though, you know.
A lot of them still don't really do it all that much. I mean, if you look at Final Fantasy now, most of the dialogue there is dialogue barking, or a little bit of dialogue before you start the turn-based combat and stuff. Other than that, there were just maybe minimal cutscenes now, but other than that, not much. Not much of the RPG. The JRPGs consider that to be important. They find other ways to tell their story. And that's for, I think, a lot of games to decide. How do you want to tell your story? Do you rely on dialogue or do you not? That's a choice you need to make. But yeah, that's kind of all we have time for. I want to thank my two guests for joining me tonight, and I want to thank everyone who is going to be watching this podcast. I'd love to hear some thoughts from all of you. You are welcome to leave it in the comments below or in any of my feedback. And hopefully we can continue the series. It's really a lot of fun to get a lot of discussion out of people, and I think to learn a lot of things. Trust me, I learn a lot from all this research. So it's fun. But again, thank you to NeckRomancer. Thank you to GetRektByMartie. It was a lovely time having both of you on. I do hope you guys are going to enjoy your Saturday nights. And I will see you on the next one.
Good, man.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.